Greetings, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Here I am outside Brentford Crown Court. Not the most gorgeous building in London, you might agree. So Brentford lies just north of the River Thames, and the etymology of this toponym is Brigantia, like holy water. And then ford was added as a suffix. Why? Because the river is very narrow and shallow, and certainly at low tide it was possible to wade through the river. Because remember, the Thames is tidal as far west as Teddington. The water's coming in from the North Sea and up to there. So sometimes it can be very low indeed. And it was even more irregular before we had the Thames Flood Relief Barrier or various other drainage channels. But it's a very significant spot in British history at several junctures, even before Britain existed as Britain. So you see here this column which was put up in 1909 by the local county council to commemorate this. So in 54 BC, it's believed it's around here that Julius Caesar forced the river. He crossed the river despite opposition from Cassius, the leader of the ancient British tribes. Remember, in ancient Roman times, this country wasn't a country as such. There were several different kingdoms, often fighting against each other. There was no concept of England or of Britain. Britannia, the Romans named it after what the ancient Greeks had said, Britannicae. Anyway, so some of the local British tribes were in touch with their cousins in Gaul, resisting the Romans. Others of them welcomed the Romans and collaborated the Romans against their local enemies. So that was that. So Julius Caesar, he invaded this country twice in 55 BC and 54 BC, and he wrote about it in Gallic Wars, as in Wars of Gaul, Gaul being the ancient name for France. And he writes in the third person, Julius Caesar did this, then it was said to Julius Caesar, blah, 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 rather than I did this, he told me, then we did whatever. He always does it in the third person. So perhaps it makes it more credible or authoritative, something like that. So it was an extension of his campaigns in Gaul. Is before he seized power, making himself sole consul for life, dictator, and all the rest of it. Carrying on marching to Verulamium, as it says, what we call St Albans. The river Ver bisects St Albans, and that's why there's a title Earl of Verulam, or Verulam, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. So a very historic ancient Roman town, rather more important than Londinium, or London as it once was. So that's that. There's Julius Caesar's camp down in Wimbledon. We really don't know if that's where he camped. There are some ancient Roman ruins there. And some ruins of ruined palisades were found in the river here in 1909. And so it roughly fits the description of the place that he gave. We're not absolutely certain this is where the battle took place. Anyway, so then the Romans withdrew in the early 5th century AD, told the Britons to provide for their own defense. They were Romanized Britons speaking Latin. People like St. Patrick, Patroclus, as in he was the son of a priest, he was patrician, hence the name Patrick, and really adopted Roman culture because the Angles, Saxons and Jutes were invading. Jutland being the mainland bit of Denmark, the Angles from what's now northern Germany. Indeed, England is originally in Germany. It's a peninsula there, close to the Danish border. And the Saxons, as in from Saxony, Lower Saxony, Saxony-Anhalt, those states in north-central Germany. So they were landing on the east coast, defeating the ancient Britons and pushing them out. And Artorius, as a Roman centurion, fought against them at Camalodunum, that's Colchester. So Camalodunum, we believe, is Camelot in the legends. So some of the ancient Britons fleeing across the Celtic Sea to Gaul, landing in Brittany. That's why that peninsula is Brittany as opposed to Great Britain. Some going to Wales, to northern England, to Scotland, to Ireland. So the Irish were descendants of the ancient Britons in a sense. Many Welsh people say that the real Britons and that the centre of their culture, Brythonic culture, was Parliament Hill in London. What else? So we know Wales is Cymru in the Welsh language. Then there's the Cambrian Mountains there. Obviously there's Cumbria in northwest England. So the Anglo-Saxons ruled for a while and seemed to overlook the fact that they weren't the original inhabitants of the country. And well, I suppose they got their comeuppance because over 400 years later, another lot of people invaded from roughly where the Angles, Saxons and Jutes had come from Denmark to a lesser extent Norway and Sweden. But that's the way. I mean, 400 years, when we're looking so far back, doesn't seem like a very long time. But to us, of course, it's a hugely long time. Imagine looking back to roughly about 1600. Oh, well, you lot came from there in 1600, but, you know, you can't come here now, something like that. Anyway, so then as the Danes were invading, Offa was one of the Anglo-Saxon kings, and he built Offa's dyke on the border roughly where Wales is. And so there was a count to the church here, because Christianity was here in the late Roman period, but not very solidly. So St. Augustine came a bit later, and he was welcomed by the king of the Canti, as in Kent, who gave him some land and allowed to build the first church at Canterbury. Probably there were other churches before that, but this is the one we really know about. And that was rebuilt from wood into stone and expanded to Canterbury Cathedral. So accounts of the church was held here. Should this be an independent church? Should it be part of the Universal Church? It was eventually decided to be part of the Universal Church, use Latin and so on. Remember, there was one church throughout Europe back then, because there's no split between Eastern and Western Church. You can't really say Catholic, because Orthodox and Catholic were united until 1054 AD. Okay, so that was Offa, king of Mercia, trying to keep the ancient Britons out, as in Wales, Mercia being in the West Midlands of England, still Mercia police and so on. So it's fascinating the way some of these names of kingdoms of ancient times have been revived. And of course, England, apart from the peninsula in northern Germany, later came to refer to what's now East Anglia and West Anglia, not even a quarter of what's modern-day England. So languages evolves, and even the signification of place names changes over time. So roughly Cambridgeshire, Huntingdonshire, perhaps Nottinghamshire, Essex, Norfolk, Suffolk, so on. And indeed, other toponyms are because of the Saxons. Sussex, the South Saxons; Essex, the East Saxons; Middlesex, the Middle Saxons; and indeed Wessex, that's several southwest English counties, are West Saxons, no North Saxons; and indeed Norfolk, the North folk; and Suffolk, the South folk, and so forth. What else was I going to point out about this and that? So the Danes invaded from the late 9th century AD, and King Alfred, born in Winchester, born in Wantage, began the fight back at them. The English lost control, or the Anglo-Saxons, perhaps I should say, lost control of London and moved their capital to Winchester. They eventually regained London. The thing about London bridges falling down being due to the Danes, apparently that's actually an urban myth. But even after the capital moved back to London, what happened, it was the royal treasury remained at Winchester for centuries. Certainly the time when William Rufus died, 1100, crucially, his younger brother, Henry I, went there to claim the royal treasury. Money is power. So going on to another one of the Anglo-Saxon kings, Edward Ironside, and he fought King Canute, one of the Danish kings here, and defeated him, drove him back across the Thames. So for a while, the King of Denmark and Norway also ruled England, but a more effective control of northern and eastern England where so many Danes and Norsemen landed. York was Jorvik, of course, and till the end of the 11th century AD, certainly, many of those people there, they spoke Norse languages and viewed themselves as Norse rather than English. Like when Harald Hardrada landed there, they welcomed him as a liberator, as their rightful king, didn't perceive him as an invader. In southern and western England, it would have been quite different. But these differences were sort of ironed out over time through intermarriage. Some people say, oh, it's still there deep down, or even something to do with Labour voting areas. Okay, so we would have been in the county of Middlesex. So what's London north of the Thames? Most of that was Middlesex. And the county town of Middlesex was at the city of Westminster. Some people view that it was. City of Westminster was only set up in the mid-11th century when Westminster Abbey was built under Edward the Confessor. And others say, well, no, Brentford was the county town of Westminster, and the elections took place here at a place called the Butts. Remember, there was no secret ballot till about 1870. Men had to openly declare it, often write it down in a book, a very useful source for historians. And John Wilkes, the famous radical MP, the champion of freedom of expression and the freedom of the press, he was elected around here for the city of Westminster, which was the most democratic constituency, as in most men had the right to vote. Remember, until 1832, very, very few men had the right to vote, perhaps 5%. The Great Reform Act of 1832 extended the franchise only a little bit. Okay, so what else has happened here? Well, the Battle of Brentford, 21st of November, 1642. The English Civil War had erupted that August when Charles I had left London, realising he was bitterly unpopular in London, and retreated to Nottingham, raised the royal standard as a signal to rally anyone who wanted to come and join the King's army was going to fight against the parliamentarians. Not that everyone in the Parliament was against him. 2/3 of the House of Commons was against him. House of Lords more like even Stevens. Of course, some people changed sides. But anyway, I shan't give you a blow-by-blow account of the English Civil War. But so the Oxford was the capital of the Royalists, and the Royalists, they came down from Oxford. They gathered at Hounslow Heath. Of course, it was a couple of days' march from Oxford, it being 50 miles away, and having thousands of men. And the parliamentarians had some defences here at Brentford. This was considered quite far west of London, 10 miles west of London. So they also had defences across the river. And there was a battle here. After a couple of hours, the parliamentarians realised it was unavailing for them. They withdrew, a few of them having been killed. Only about 70 people killed in total between the two sides then. The Royalists felt they were on a roll, and there was some fighting on boats on the river. Artillery was involved, and they pressed on to Turnham Green, which is that away, about 3 miles further west. And there was a battle at Turnham Green, and the parliamentarians had pressed many able-bodied men into service. They had no military training whatsoever, so that the Royalists were outnumbered, but neither side really fought to the hilt. Okay, they were not quite completely committed, and as the Royalists hadn't clearly won, they backed off. They retreated back to winter quarters at Oxford, so London was saved. The parliamentarians were never able to launch such a big offensive again during the English Civil War towards London. They never got this close to London then, so perhaps they should have gone all out for it. Should have gone for broke. They were gambling for high stakes. Had they prevailed and they'd captured London, that was a very big prize indeed. It was worth risking it for, because that wouldn't necessarily have won them the Civil War, but it would have brought them a lot closer. It would have been a huge psychological blow to the parliamentarians early in the war. London, with its commercial power, with its factories such as they were to make weapons, as a port, everything, it would have been a crushing defeat for the parliamentarians, and stood the Royalists in much better stead. So that is Brentford, this sort of unassuming and, let's face it, not terribly attractive part of London, is in fact incredibly historic. So this was put up in 1909 by a local politician and historian, but it wasn't originally here. It was relocated in 1992. But it was closer to the river, if I got that right, but it was sort of obscured by houses by 92. Okay, I shall switch it off now.